I've made a video about maps. Why? Because I said I might, but mostly because I felt like it. I don't want to talk about what I've been doing on Spacetime, and figured since barely anyone's listening anyway, I'll talk about whatever the hell I feel like, in a completely self-indulgent manner. I've made maps for D&D campaigns, video games, and even books. Some have been sketches, some have been interactive nonsense that the user can actively explore. There are some great YouTube videos on how to make maps, the rules of continental plates and geology, etc. There are also some nice pieces of software to help you make maps such as Wonderdraft and Incarnate. I tend to draw my own maps from scratch personally, but how you make your map isn't that important really. The real question is why? Why do you need a map? Do you need a map at all? Often the answer is no. An example, I have a map of the area where the Living Dungeon takes place. The Living Dungeon is a fantasy game set inside an underground, ever-changing dungeon, so a map of the interior would be completely useless. The events that take place outside of the ever-changing dungeon only occur in the prologue and the epilogue cutscenes. So why did I make a map? Self-indulgence, right? Well, there was also a book, although 95% of that book takes place inside the dungeon. The only purpose the map could possibly serve is to show the relevant towns or directions that the different characters came from originally. In other words, there was no need for a map. It's just a quirky little thing that sits on the first page of the book. Why did I bother? Self-indulgence. It felt like it would fit, and I wanted to see if I could realistically make a basic map that looked decent on a Kindle. Is that a good excuse? Not really, because I also sketched out an extended map for no bloody reason. Self-indulgence. Okay, so what about a book where the locations matter? Part 1 of the Trials of Tallinn has this map. The characters in the book make a journey across the country. Many, but not all, of the locations are mentioned. And where they were was important to the plot because I wanted to make sure that travel times were consistent and the complex political and military action was derived from logic. That can't be self-indulgent, right? Of course it is. I could have got exactly the same info from my initial MS Paint doodle. I painted the map top down because I felt like it. I stylised it because I wanted it to look nice. What about all the political and military manoeuvres? What about getting the distances right? Well, the war that happened is backstory. Some of the events are mentioned, but not many because I didn't want to slow the plot. And the point of view character isn't that interested in the history when she starts out. Does consistency in the distances matter? Will any reader think to question the logistics or care? Highly unlikely. The map is self-indulgent. I'll get back to self-indulgent maps in a moment when I decide to indulge myself in more self-indulgent chit-chat about my self-indulgent maps. But here is a form of map mapping that isn't self-indulgent. The crappy sketch that's done on the fly over the course of a campaign. So the first thing we do is, when they come into the area, they come across a campfire, and your adventurer's like, "Oh, excuse me, sir. I was wondering if you could help us find a local village." And the guy sitting at the campfire, he looks a bit rough, but he's like, "Yeah, alright mate, I'll draw you a wee map." And you're like, "Spiffing!" So he says, the nearest village is all the way to the west. Ta-da! But unfortunately you need to go south first because there's a forest full of nasty bunnies. Or probably witches, but it could just be nasty bunnies. Lovely trees. But he was actually contracted to go just to the north to some ruins because apparently there were some bandits there in the encampment, and he says you could take up the contract instead because two of his friends had some bad fishing. Now they don't feel like it because they need to be within 1 mile of the outhouse. So your party goes south and they meet an old man, and the old man's like, "Oh, hello. Yes, the village is to the north, but to the south there's a temple. So if you want to get supplies, go there." And your cleric's like, "Oh, that sounds lovely." So you head down to the temple, but you find out actually it's a cult. It's a cult who worships a giant starfish called Potato. And you guys get trapped, and then they manage to escape eventually. Like, oof, that was difficult, so they go and hide in the fields. And at that point they realise that they found out that that is just a little bit of the cult, and there's actually a much bigger temple with a very spiky roof. Should have a starfish for a roof, it really should. There we go. And now you guys have got bounties on your heads because that gives me excuse for random encounters. And you're like, oh no, we should go and tackle those cultists. And then you say, no thanks, that's not a good idea. So they all go to the village, but the village has got rubbish supplies. But thankfully the village tells them that the city is nearby. This is probably session 2 or 3 by now, so hopefully you thought ahead that what's the city? You know, carpools, bike sharing, that kind of thing. So you guys start to go to the city, but you decide, oh no, there's a bridge. And what's in bridges? Trolls. Always trolls. So you guys have to deal with the troll. And you didn't come prepared, so you've got nothing on you, and you're like, would you be okay with 3 packets of crisps and a Mars bar? And the troll's like, well, business is tight, so sure. Another fun method of map making is to not do it. Have your locations, make descriptions for those locations, use them in any order you like, and have the players make the map as they go. Yeah, the players, not you. Like this. As the portal opens and your party is sucked into the chaos, you retrospectively realise that pissing into the sacred fountain was a poor life choice. You wake up, you and your allies are lying by a river in an unknown land. The sun is beginning to set, so you take in your surroundings. To the east beyond the river you can see swampland. There are some walkways on stilts with wooden poles mounted either side, covered in dream catchers and what looks like animal skulls. Deep in the mist you can perhaps make out a few huts, but you aren't sure. To the north the river exits from a wide cavern against a cliff shelf. There are large mounds of something outside, but you can't make them out properly from here. Is it a mine? Or could those possibly be piles of bones? To the south the river winds into a dense, dark forest of twisted, ugly trees. Even from where you are standing, you can hear the calls of ravens and maybe other, more vicious beasts. To the west lies a village and open fields. Pixie lights dance atop the wheat, and when the wind blows from that direction, you hear the faint sounds of merriment and music, and the faint smell of ale and roasted meat tickles your nostrils. As the players travel, you can add new locations to the map from your selection of prepared places. Or you could use tiles, or just draw cards. This map making method means the world is built up purely at the behest of the players and isn't self-indulgent at all. Well, the descriptions you write might be. In this section of video definitely was. Anyway, jumping to the other end of the spectrum, here's a map we used for a fantasy campaign we played over the course of a year. Is it self-indulgent? Hell yes! It was originally spiralled out from a smaller map I made for a game that we were working on with a big publisher. The game fell through when they got bought out, but that's life in the games industry. The map continued to exist and was expanded upon significantly. By the time we started the role-playing campaign, this map was mounted on the wall, and we used bits of string and blue tack to track the movement of the players. Totally self-indulgent, right? Well, who lived where was thoroughly documented. How a person could travel across the land was well established. How long it took to get from A to B to C was known. 90% of the map was never used. Self-indulgent, right? Well, not entirely. There can be a point to this kind of detail, depending on the type of campaign you're running. A main goal was established which was unknown to the players. They all just started with individual selfish goals. A starting point was established, and then the players were given mission choices. Location choices, political choices, social choices, and many other choices along the way. They could essentially do whatever they liked, assuming the dice agreed, and based on those choices, the next possible events could be established. With the world fully established already, it was easy to figure out how the other inhabitants of that world would react to the players. A large complex web of politics moved and shifted as the players messed with the established order, while trying to figure things out, like who the villain was, and stop him or her. Antagonists became allies, allies became villains. Borders changed and new structures of power emerged. Sure, some players might not care about the subtle power plays of a world, and they just want to go somewhere, stab something, and are quite happy to jump into a giant plot hole if there is treasure at the bottom. But for those of you who do enjoy all the details and the machinations, the tales become more memorable, and the map becomes a symbol of their stories. But mostly it's just self-indulgent.